The bells of the capital tolled like iron, echoing through the marble corridors of the cathedral. Incense coiled in the air, thick and cloying, as if even the gods themselves sought to smother the truth beneath smoke and sweetness. Rain stood at the altar, her silver-blonde hair veiled, her blue eyes reflecting the flicker of 1,000 candles. To the crowd, she was radiant, a vision of purity. To herself, she was a blade wrapped in silk. The man at her side, Prince Dorian, soon to be king, clasped her hand just tightly enough for ceremony. His gaze didn't linger on her. It slid instead over the assembled nobles, calculating, weighing, measuring. He saw her as a commoner, plucked from obscurity, elevated by circumstance, and, as he believed, his generosity. He didn't know of the nights she'd spent training in the shadows, learning the language of venom, of leaves and roots that could kill with a kiss. He didn't know the truth of her bloodline, that she was not just a bride, but a queen in her own right, sworn in silence by a tribe that waited beyond the forests. When the priest pronounced them bound, the crowd erupted in cheers. Dorian raised her hand as though she were a trophy. Rain lips curved into the faintest smile, her expression serene, her heartbeat steady. But beneath the lace and vows, she carried secrets that could topple kingdoms. The wedding feast sprawled into the night. Jeweled goblets clinked, platters of roasted meats and honey-glazed fruits filled the tables, and musicians played bright tunes that masked the truth beneath the gilded facade. Rain played her part flawlessly. She smiled when nobles offered false congratulations, bowed her head when ladies whispered about her common blood, and let her husband, now King Dorian, display her like a conquest. She felt their eyes, hungry and judging, but she did not bend beneath them. Her stillness unnerved more than tears ever could. At Dorian's side sat his foreign bride-to-be. Though not yet crowned, her presence was already felt in whispers. Lyrissa. Her beauty shimmered like polished glass, her laughter too sweet to be trusted. She watched Rain with a smile that never touched her eyes. Later, when the wine ran dry and the halls emptied, Dorian led Rain to the royal chambers. The bed was vast, dressed in crimson silks, more a throne than a place of rest. He shed his cloak, crown gleaming on the stand beside him, and looked at her as one might look at a piece of art, something owned, admired briefly, then ignored. "You will give me heirs," he said, his tone cool. "Not cruel, just careless. But do not mistake this for love. Your duty is to the throne and to me, nothing more." Rain stood at the foot of the bed, her veil still falling from silver strands. For a heartbeat, she considered slipping one of the vials hidden in her belongings into his cup of wine. One drop, and she could be free. One drop, and her tribe's queen would never kneel to any man. Instead, she smiled faintly, lowering her eyes as though obedient. "Of course, my king." He turned away, satisfied, climbing into the silks without a second glance. His indifference cut deeper than cruelty ever could. She sat on the edge of the bed, her heart steady, her mind already weaving plans. From the balcony, she glimpsed the courtyard below. Torches burned low, guards paced. Among them was Cale, broad-shouldered, his movements sharp and certain. His eyes lifted, catching hers through shadow and distance. For an instant, neither looked away. There was no bow of the head, no feigned respect, just raw, unspoken recognition. Heat stirred in her chest, a spark she hadn't expected. It unsettled her more than Dorian's disdain. She broke the gaze first, pulling the silks around her shoulders. But the memory of his stare lingered, heavier than the crown upon her head. Tonight she was queen by title only. But in the shadows, her true reign waited. And already her heart whispered a dangerous truth, that strength and desire might one day come from the same forbidden hand. The days after the wedding blurred into a routine of silken cages. Servants trailed her every step, courtiers whispered when she passed, and Dorian scarcely acknowledged her beyond formal appearances. The palace was breathtaking, marble halls carved with scenes of conquest, high windows spilling golden light, gardens lush with imported roses, yet every inch of it felt like a prison. Rain had lived within walls before, but never one so gilded, so suffocating. Every glance from the nobles reminded her she did not belong. They saw the silver hair, the blue eyes, the fair skin, but not the blood that ran through her veins, not the queen she was before this crown. To them, she was a decoration, a fleeting indulgence of the king. Lyrissa ensured they never forgot it. The foreign beauty moved through the palace with the ease of someone who knew she had already won. Jewels draped her like chains of light. Her laughter carried a sharper note beneath its sweetness. Where Dorian ignored Rain, he lavished Lyrissa with attention, speaking in tones low enough to be intimate, loud enough for Rain to hear. On the third night of feasting, the attempt came. The hall was alive with music and smoke from roasted game, nobles pressing close to bask in the glow of their new king. Sells sat straight-backed, every inch the perfect bride, when a servant set a goblet at her place. The wine inside was rich and red, catching the firelight. She lifted it, her slender fingers brushing the rim, and there it was. The faintest shimmer, an oily sheen invisible to untrained eyes. Her lips curved. She raised the goblet high, tilting it as though to admire the way the torchlight burned in its depths. Then, with a delicate flick of her wrist, she let a single drop spill across the servant's sleeve. The silk hissed. Color bled outward in branching veins, the fabric eaten away as though consumed by moths. Gasps rippled down the table. The servant dropped the tray in terror, stammering apologies. Dorian's face flushed with irritation at the disruption. But Rain only smiled, her voice calm, almost kind. "Be more careful next time," she said, gently, as one might scold a child. The courtiers laughed, tension breaking into relief. They thought it nothing more than clumsiness, a servant's mistake. Only one pair of eyes told her otherwise. Across the hall, Lyrissa's painted lips curved, her smile poised and perfect, but her gaze was sharp enough to cut. Later, when the revelry dulled to murmurs and the moon crowned the sky, Rain slipped into the palace gardens. Cool air brushed her skin, carrying the scent of night jasmine. Marble fountains whispered, their waters silver beneath the moonlight. Here, at least, she could breathe. A sound broke the stillness, the rhythm of boots on stone. She turned, and Chaol emerged from shadow. His armor gleamed faintly, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade more out of habit than threat. But it was his eyes that caught her, dark, unflinching, and fixed entirely on her. "You knew," he said, his voice low, roughened by restraint. Her head tilted slightly, silver hair falling like spilled light over her shoulder. "Knew what?" "That the goblet was poisoned." Her lips parted in the faintest smile. "Perhaps." The silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. His gaze swept her face, lingering on the curve of her mouth, the unshaken steadiness in her eyes. She should have looked away, should have reminded him of his station. But she didn't. "You should tell the king," he said at last, though his voice lacked conviction. Her smile deepened, slow, deliberate. "And what would that accomplish? He would dismiss me, or worse, dismiss the truth. No, it is better this way. Let them underestimate me." Chaol's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened with something that unsettled her more than danger ever had. Desire. "Be careful, my queen," he said, and the words trembled with weight. "There are those in this palace who would rather see you buried than crowned." Rain stepped closer, the moonlight painting her skin silver. She stopped just shy of his reach, her voice a whisper that curled like smoke. "Then let them try." For a moment the garden belonged only to them. The fountains hushed. The night held its breath. She thought she heard it then, his heartbeat, strong and unyielding, matching the pull of her own. When he bowed his head and stepped back into shadow, the air felt colder for his absence. But his words lingered, echoing within her chest. Not all battles were fought with blades or poisons. Some were fought with restraint. And Rain wondered, as she turned back to the marble halls, how long either of them could resist before restraint burned away to ash. Before the crown, before the vows, before her name was bound to Dorian's, there had been Chaol. She remembered the first time she saw him, a broad-shouldered shadow in polished armor, assigned to escort her through the palace on the day she was first presented as the prince's bride-to-be. The nobles had whispered, the servants had stared, and she had walked like a lamb among wolves. Yet Chaol's presence steadied her. He spoke no words of comfort, but his silence was an anchor against the storm of eyes. Later that evening, she slipped away from the banquet, carrying a worn leather book, its pages filled with careful notes, the properties of herbs, poisons, and cures. In her nervous grip, it had fallen, scattering parchment across the marble floor. Cale bent to gather them before she could. His gauntleted hands, surprisingly gentle, collected the pages one by one. When their fingers brushed, the contact lasted no longer than a heartbeat, but heat lingered along her skin, startling in its intensity. She looked up and found his eyes, hazel, restless, alive. In the torchlight, they glowed a molten amber, like embers banked beneath ash. "You should be more careful," he said quietly. Not stern, not mocking, only steady, as though the words were meant for her alone. Her lips curved faintly. Perhaps. After that, there had been other moments, too fleeting for anyone else to notice. His hand steadying her when her gown tangled beneath her step during a festival. A glance in the garden that lingered too long before he bowed. The brush of his shoulder in a crowded corridor, the warmth of it alive against her skin for hours after. Each small thing, insignificant on its own, but together weaving a thread between them, fragile, invisible, unbreakable. Now, standing in the garden beneath the silver hush of moonlight, the echo of those moments pressed close. Cale's words from earlier still lingered in the air, low and rough with warning. "Be careful, my queen." And when she looked at him now, she saw those same hazel eyes, shifting in the pale light, no longer amber, but green, deep as forests, steady and consuming. They were not the eyes of a guard upon his queen. They were the eyes of a man who remembered every brush of her fingers, every stolen glance, every silence that had passed between them. The garden seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, she let herself drown in them. "Perhaps I have always been careful, Cale," she whispered, her voice softer than the night. "But not careful enough." His composure faltered, just enough for her to see it, the flicker of desire, the same heat that had haunted her since that first touch. When he bowed and stepped back into shadow, duty reclaiming him, the air grew colder for his absence. Yet as she returned to the palace halls, her pulse still carried the rhythm of his gaze, a reminder that Cale had not only seen her when no one else had. He had never stopped seeing her. The morning court was a theater, and Dorian adored the stage. He sat on the high seat draped in gold, basking in the attention of foreign envoys and nobles eager to flatter. His hair gleamed like sunlight through glass, his smile measured, practiced. He listened only when praise fed his pride, dismissing matters of state with careless waves of his jeweled hand. The throne room shimmered with opulence, marble floors veined with gold, banners of crimson and ivory fluttering in the breeze from high-arched windows. The scent of incense and rose oil hung heavy in the air, masking the rot beneath the court's polished surface. Rain sat at his side, posture flawless, her silver blonde hair braided in a crown. Her gown was a pale blue silk, understated but elegant, a deliberate contrast to the jeweled excess around her. To the court, she appeared serene. But beneath her calm expression, she counted every move in the performance. Who lingered too long in Lyrissa's gaze, who fawned over Dorian, who dared let their eyes drift to her. She noted the way Lord Thane leaned forward when Lyrissa's name was mentioned, the way Lady Viral's fans stilled when Rain spoke. Every glance, every silence, every brittle laugh was a piece on the board. Lyrissa entered late, as though time itself bent for her. She wore a gown of emerald silk that clung like water, layered with gold filigree. Her lips were painted the shade of crushed berries, her black hair cascading in waves that shimmered with each step. Her green eyes caught the light with a predator's gleam. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing to Dorian with theatrical grace, though her gaze flickered to Rain, sharp and taunting. "What a vision your court must be, to host both a king so radiant and a queen so humble." The courtiers tittered, the insult wrapped in silk too blatant to miss. Dorian's lips curved, faintly amused, but he said nothing. Rain inclined her head, voice cool, steady. "Humility, I find, is often more dangerous than vanity." A silence cut through the hall. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably, others stifled smiles. Dorian's amusement faded, irritation replacing it not at Lyrissa, but at Rain for daring to answer. Lyrissa's lips parted in a smile of painted sweetness. "How wise. Perhaps you might teach me in time." The court laughed again, but the sound was brittle, forced. A few nobles glanced toward Dorian, gauging his mood. Others looked to Rain, waiting to see if she would falter. She didn't. From his post along the wall, Cale's hazel eyes flicked to her. He stood still as stone, yet his jaw tightened, a faint shift in his stance betraying the anger he would never voice. When Lyris's gaze swept the room and lingered too long, daring cells to break, Cale's stare did not move from her, steady, grounding, as though by sheer will he could keep her from shattering. Rain met his eyes only for a breath. That single glance steadied her more than any crown or title. Then, as if summoned by the tension, a foreign envoy stepped forward, a man from the southern isles, draped in crimson robes and gold rings. He bowed low to Dorian, then turned to Rain with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your Majesty," he said, voice smooth as oil, "it is said your queen has a gift for healing. How fortunate should the court ever fall ill." A few nobles chuckled. The jab was subtle, a reminder of her common roots, her knowledge of herbs and poultices, not politics. Rain smiled, unshaken. "Indeed, and should the court fall ill, I would know precisely where to look for the cause." The envoy's smile faltered. The laughter that followed was sharper this time, tinged with surprise. Even Dorian's fingers stilled on the arm of his throne. Cale's gaze didn't waver. He watched her not as a soldier watches a queen, but as a man watches a storm gather strength. Rain turned back to the court, her expression serene, her heartbeat iron. The game between queens had begun. The echo of brittle laughter still clung to Rain's skin as she left the throne room. The marble corridors stretched long and empty, their silence pressing after the din of court. She walked swiftly, her pale blue gown whispering against stone, until the scent of incense faded and cool air met her lungs. The gardens waited, always the gardens, a place of shadows, moonlight, and memory. She paused beneath a carved archway draped in ivy, closing her eyes, steadying the rhythm of her breath. The distant trickle of a fountain reached her ears, soft and steady, like a heartbeat beneath stone. "Your Majesty." The voice came low, steady. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Cale stood a few paces behind her, helm tucked beneath his arm. His posture was rigid, but his expression was not quiet, watchful, as though he were weighing every word before it was spoken. The torchlight from the hall flickered across him, gilding the edges of his armor, but it was his eyes that held her. Hazel, shifting with the light, amber one moment, green the next, like the forest floor beneath a canopy of flame. "You shouldn't follow me," she said softly, though the words felt hollow. "I didn't follow," he replied, stepping closer. "I was sent to guard." A pause, then quieter, "but I would have come regardless." She turned, and the garden seemed to hush around them. The ivy rustled faintly in the breeze, and the scent of jasmine drifted between them. She remembered the steadiness of his hand when she stumbled once at a festival, the way his gaze lingered too long in moonlight, the warmth of his breath when he stood too close. Moments that should have faded, but hadn't. "They try to humiliate me," she said at last, her voice low, edged with steel. "They want me small, silent, and when I speak, it is he who looks at me as though I've betrayed him." Cale's jaw tightened. "Because you threaten what he cannot control." The words struck her with quiet force. She inhaled, slow and sharp, her lips parting but no reply forming. The torchlight shifted, casting his face half in shadow, half in flame, and for a dangerous moment she thought of leaning into that light. Instead, she turned her gaze away. "You should not speak so of your king." "I'm not speaking to my king," Cale said, voice low, rough. "I'm speaking to my queen." Silence, only the rustle of ivy in the night wind, the quiet pulse of their hearts. Rain's hand brushed the stone at her side, grounding herself in its coolness. She should end this, step away, dismiss him, cloak herself in the distance duty demanded. But when she lifted her eyes again, his were waiting, steady and unyielding, as though he had been holding her gaze long before she had the courage to return it. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to him, the line of his shoulders, the scent of steel and smoke, the quiet strength in his stance. Then, with the precision of a man who had built walls higher than any castle, Cale bowed his head, and stepped back into shadow. "Forgive me, my queen." He turned, boots striking stone, the sound fading until she was alone. Rain exhaled, her hands trembling only once before she steadied them. He had left her, yes, but the echo of his words clung to her skin more fiercely than Dorian's touch ever had. The corridors slept in silence, the hush of midnight broken only by the sigh of torches burning low. Shadows stretched long across the marble floors, flickering with each breath of flame. The palace, so loud by day, now held its secrets close, behind velvet curtains, beneath polished stone, within the hearts of those who dared not sleep. Behind the closed doors of her chambers, Rain sat in stillness. Her pale hair was unbound, spilling over her shoulders like threads of moonlight. The candle on her desk burned low, its flame dancing in the draught from the window, casting golden light across her face and the vial she turned slowly between her fingers. Inside the glass, a fine gray powder shimmered faintly, not glittering, but pulsing, as though it remembered the lives it had taken. It was made from the root of a flower that bloomed only once every 7 years, harvested under a blood moon, ground with obsidian and ash. A whisper of it could silence a man. A breath could erase him. She waited. The sound came then, soft, deliberate. The whisper of a lock eased open, the faint creak of hinges pushed just wide enough to admit a figure cloaked in black. He moved like a shadow, slinking across the room with practiced stealth. One of Lyris's creatures, no doubt, by the way he glanced over his shoulder, by the way his fingers trembled as he approached her writing desk. He slid open the drawers with care, as though afraid they might bite. From his sleeve he drew a stack of folded letters. Their edges were worn, stained with ink and perfume. He placed them inside the drawer, letters inked with scandal, names and lovers she had never touched. Lies crafted to rot her reputation from within. Proof, should they be discovered, that the queen was a faithless whore. He began to rise. Only then did Rain speak. "Finished." The intruder froze, his breath caught. Slowly he turned. She sat waiting in her chair, silver hair gleaming in the candlelight, blue eyes fixed upon him with glacial calm. No fury, no fear, only that cold, unblinking gaze, the gaze of someone who had seen death and learned its language. "Why you shouldn't be awake," he stammered. Her lips curved, not in amusement, but in something colder. "I am always awake." He reached for his blade. She lifted the vial and blew. A fine dust drifted into the air, catching the candle light for a single heartbeat before vanishing into his lungs, his skin, his blood. He coughed, choked, staggered backward, clutching at his throat. His eyes rolled white, then black. Veins darkened beneath his skin, crawling like vines. His fingers clawed at his chest, his mouth opened in a scream that never came. Rain rose, her movements fluid, unhurried. She stepped past him as though he were nothing more than smoke. The door to her chambers opened with a soft click. She left it wide. Minutes later, the palace guards found the body sprawled in the corridor. His face was frozen in a scream so hideous the torches seemed to recoil from it. Black blood oozed from his ears and mouth, staining the marble in grotesque rivulets. His eyes, once human, were pools of bottomless pitch. The guards crossed themselves. One whispered of demons, another muttered of curses. None dared to look deeper. None dared to ask who had last seen him alive. Behind her door, Rain extinguished the candle with a soft breath. The room fell into darkness, but her expression remained serene, untouched by what had transpired. Let them whisper. Let them fear. In fear, there was power. The palace gardens were quiet at dusk, the sky bleeding into violet and gold. Rain moved through the hedges with practiced ease, her cloak drawn tight, her steps silent. She passed the fountain where nobles once laughed, the marble bench where Lyrissa had whispered lies, and came to the ivy-covered alcove tucked behind the eastern wall, a place forgotten by most, remembered only by those who needed secrecy. Cale was already there. He stood with his back to the wall, arms crossed, eyes scanning the shadows. When she stepped into view, he straightened but said nothing. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "You summon me." I shouldn't have. Cale stepped forward, torchlight from the distant corridor catching the edge of his jaw, the glint of steel at his hip. Then why did you? Rain hesitated. The silence between them was not empty. It was heavy, filled with everything they could not say in daylight. The man who died, she said, voice low, was sent to destroy me. Cale's jaw tightened. I know. You didn't stop him. I didn't need to. She looked up, surprised. His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. I knew you would, he said. Rain exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Lyrissa suspects. She's planting seeds in Dorian's mind, twisting truth into poison. She's good at it, Cale said, but not as good as you. A flicker passed between them, not pride, not flattery, but recognition. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. He's beginning to doubt me. He's beginning to fear you, Cale corrected. There's a difference. Rain turned away, fingers brushing the ivy-covered wall. Fear is useful, until it turns. Cale moved beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the tension in his stance. Then let me be the blade that turns it back. She looked at him, truly looked. At the man who had stood beside her in silence, who had watched her rise, who had never asked for anything in return. You would risk everything. I already have. The wind stirred the ivy, and for a moment the garden felt like a cathedral, quiet, sacred, dangerous. Rain reached into her cloak and drew out a folded scrap of parchment. This came from the forest. My tribe is watching, waiting, they want me to act. Cale took the paper, eyes scanning the symbols inked in a language few could read. And you. I want to survive. He nodded once, then tucked the message into his armor. Then we begin. She stepped back, her voice returning to steel. Not yet. Let them think they've won. Let Lyrissa whisper. Let Dorian rage. Let the court play its games. Cale's eyes darkened. And when the time comes. Rain lips curved, slow and cold. Then we remind them who the queen truly is. Rain did not leave. Instead, she lingered. Her hand lifted, almost of its own accord, brushing back a loose strand of his dark hair. The touch was light, deliberate, the kind that could be denied later as nothing at all. Yet neither of them pretended it was. Cale stilled, his breath caught, his composure fracturing for the barest instant. Her fingers drifted lower, tracing the line of his cheek. Resting against his face, his skin was warm beneath her touch, scarred but steady, a map of battles endured. His hazel eyes locked on hers, amber fire flickering against green, betraying the storm he tried to contain. I notice, she whispered, voice soft but merciless. The way you look at me, as though you see not a queen but the woman beneath. Cale's jaw tightened, breath sharp, his body taut with restraint. You shouldn't. But you do, she interrupted, thumb brushing the edge of his jaw. Her smile was faint, dangerous. You look at me as if you can't stop. For a heartbeat, he said nothing, only held her gaze with the desperation of a man standing on the edge of surrender. Then, slowly, with the discipline that defined him, he stepped back, breaking the contact. His voice was low, ragged. If I let myself, I would never stop. The words hung between them like a vow, like a sin. Rain leaned in, her lips brushing the air beside his ear, her breath warm against his skin. The king has never touched me, she murmured. If you take me, Cale, you would be my first. She felt the tremor in him, the sharp inhale he couldn't suppress. For a heartbeat, his composure shattered desire, raw and unguarded, flashing in his eyes. Rain lips curved in the faintest of smiles. She stepped back, her cloak brushing his arm as she turned away. Think on that, she said softly, her voice carrying like smoke through the night. And then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the garden, leaving him standing in silence, a soldier bound by duty, undone by a queen's whispered confession. Midday light streamed through the high windows of Rain chambers, soft and golden, falling across the pale silks of her bed and the polished wood of her writing desk. The quiet hum of the palace lingered beyond the door, servants whispering, guards packing, courtiers scheming in their endless circles. A knock came, light, deliberate. "Enter," Rain said. The door opened to reveal Lyrissa, resplendent in a gown of emerald velvet that caught the sun in waves of sheen. Her lips, painted deep red, curved in a smile of sweetness, though her eyes glittered with sharp amusement. A maid trailed behind her, carrying a tray laden with sugared fruits and steaming cups of tea. "My dear queen," Lyrissa said, her tone lilting with false sympathy, "I thought it only right to visit you after the unfortunate scene outside your chambers. How you must be shaken, seeing such a horrid thing." Rain inclined her head with polite serenity. "Your concern is noted." Lyrissa swept gracefully to the nearest chair and sat, smoothing her skirts. The maid placed the tray on the low table between them and poured tea into delicate porcelain cups. The steam curled upward, faintly sweet, faintly bitter. "Do you find the palace restful?" Lyrissa asked, lifting a sugared fig with dainty fingers. "I know Dorian can be distant. He works so hard for the kingdom, but surely he spares you some affection." The words were light, conversational, but the knife beneath them gleamed. Rain blue eyes flicked to the tea. The sheen upon its surface, the faint wrongness of the scent, not enough for most to notice. But she knew. She always knew. She reached for the cup, lifted it, and let her hand tremble just so. In the motion, she tipped the porcelain, sending the steaming liquid spilling across the maid's arm. The girl shrieked, clutching at the burn. "Oh," Lyrissa exclaimed, rising in feigned alarm. "How clumsy." The slap cracked like a whip. Rain's hand struck the maid's cheek, sending her sprawling to her knees, sobbing. "Kneel," Rain said coldly, her voice a blade. The girl obeyed, shaking, her burned arm pressed to her chest. From beneath her cloak, Rain drew a coiled whip, leather dark, worn, deadly. With a flick of her wrist, it sang through the air. The first strike split the silence. The second drew a scream. The third painted the floor with blood. Lyrissa gasped, her painted lips parting in horror. "Stop! By the gods, stop!" But Rain did not stop until the maid collapsed, her body slack, lifeless on the marble floor. The chamber door burst open. Dorian strode in, golden hair gleaming, blue eyes wide with fury and alarm. He rushed to Lyrissa's side, catching her arm as she staggered, her emerald skirts flecked with crimson. "What madness is this?" he demanded, his gaze snapping to Rain. She stood tall, whip coiled once more in her hand, her expression calm, her blue eyes glacial. "Your foreign queen's servant tried to poison me. I dealt with her." Dorian's face flushed with anger. "You speak to me as though I am a fool." "You speak to me," Rain interrupted, her voice cutting like ice, "as though I am not your queen." The silence that followed was heavier than the body cooling on the floor. Lyrissa pressed to Dorian's side, her painted lips trembling. "She's dangerous," she whispered. "She's unhinged." Dorian tightened his grip on her, his eyes still fixed on Rain. He looked at her not with concern, but with unease, as though he were beginning to glimpse a truth he could not control. "Leave my chambers," Rain said, her tone soft, steady, commanding. "Both of you." Dorian's jaw clenched. "You will regret your actions, Rain." Her lips curved faintly. "Only if I am wrong." For a long moment, he stared at her, torn between fury and something darker, fear. Then he turned, drawing Lyrissa with him, and the door slammed shut behind them. Rain stood in silence, her hand resting on the coiled whip, her chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. The chamber smelled of tea and blood. And for the first time, she allowed herself a smile. Night had fallen over the palace, cloaking its towers in velvet shadow. The moon hung low, veiled by drifting clouds, and the wind carried the scent of rain and roses. Rain moved through the eastern gardens, her cloak drawn tight, her steps silent. Past the marble fountains and gilded statues, she reached the old greenhouse, long abandoned, its glass cracked, its vines overgrown. Unseen, another shadow followed. Kale. He had noticed her absence from her chambers, the way she slipped into the night without word or escort. His instincts had pulled him after her, though he kept to the hedges and columns, his hazel eyes sharp, his jaw set. When she reached the greenhouse door, he stopped, choosing to remain hidden in the dark. Inside, the air was damp and earthy, thick with the scent of moss and forgotten blooms. Moonlight filtered through broken panes, painting the space in fractured silver. A figure waited in the center of the room. He wore no armor, no crown. His cloak was woven from bark and shadow, his skin marked with the inked symbols of her tribe, spirals and branches, stars and teeth. His eyes, dark as river stone, gleamed with quiet recognition. "Queen of the Hollow Crown," he said, bowing low. "Daughter of the forest, blood of the root." Rain stepped forward, her voice low. "You came." "I was summoned." She studied him. He was older than she remembered, his hair streaked with gray, his shoulders broad with age and wisdom. He had once taught her how to read the wind, how to listen to the silence between heartbeats. "Things are shifting," she said. "The court is turning, Dorian is unraveling, Lyrissa is planting seeds." "And you," he asked, "are you ready to bloom?" Rain hesitated. "I am ready." The emissary nodded. He reached into his cloak and drew out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside lay a dagger obsidian, carved with runes, its hilt wrapped in braided vine. "The blade of the first queen," he said. "It was buried beneath the oldest tree. It belongs to you now." Rain took it, her fingers curling around the hilt. The dagger pulsed faintly, as though it remembered her touch. A sharp tap-tap broke the silence. Rain looked up. At the cracked glass overhead, a crow perched, its feathers ragged and black as tar. Its head tilted, its beak striking the pane again, and its eyes, black as pitch, fixed on her before it spread its wings and vanished into the night. "There will be a signal," the emissary said, unshaken. "When the moon turns red and the crows fly west, that is when we rise. And until then, you watch, you wait, you endure." Rain nodded, slipping the dagger into the folds of her cloak. "Tell them I am still their queen." They never doubted. The emissary stepped back into the shadows, his form dissolving into vine and mist. Rain stood alone in the greenhouse, the blade heavy at her side, the weight of legacy settling on her shoulders. Outside, Cale shifted in the darkness, his heart pounding at the faint sound of voices he could not decipher, the crow's caw echoing into the night. He did not step forward, did not betray her secret, but unease rippled through him, knowing she carried a world he could not touch. Rain did not tremble. She did not falter. She was the queen of the Hollow Crown. And the forest had not forgotten her. Rain had not moved when the emissary vanished into vine and mist. She stood in the fractured moonlight, the obsidian dagger heavy in her hand, its runes faintly pulsing as though alive. But she was not alone. Her blue eyes shifted to the far corner of the greenhouse, where the shadows were too thick, too still. She did not raise her voice, but her words cut through the silence like steel. "Step out, Cale." For a heartbeat, nothing. Then he emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, hazel eyes glinting in the dim light. He had shed his armor, dressed only in a dark tunic that clung to his frame. His jaw was tight, his posture rigid, as if bracing for her wrath. "You knew I was here," he said. "I always know," Rain replied, her tone cool, her grip on the dagger firm. He stepped closer. She did not retreat. Instead, she lifted the dagger, its black edge catching a sliver of moonlight, and pressed the flat of the blade against his cheek. Slowly, deliberately, she slid it down across his jaw, then lower, tracing the line of his chest. "How much are you willing to give me, Cale?" she asked, voice soft as silk, eyes cold as ice. His gaze never wavered. He stood firm, unflinching, holding her eyes with a steadiness that refused to yield. "Everything," he said simply. Her lips curved faintly. She closed the distance, her body brushing against his. Her mouth ghosted over his lips, feather-light, then trailed across his jaw in a teasing caress. He trembled, but his hands stayed at his sides, fists clenched, as if holding himself back was the only way to keep from unraveling. "You fight yourself," she whispered, "but I see you." She caught his hand and guided it upward, pressing his palm flat against her chest. Beneath his touch, her heartbeat thudded, hard, fast, alive. "How do I feel?" she breathed, her lips so close he could taste the word. Cale's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, breath ragged, but his eyes stayed locked on hers, fierce, unyielding, desperate. Rain smiled, a dangerous glimmer in her gaze. She stepped back, slow, deliberate, as if to leave him stranded in his own restraint. But he moved. His hand shot out, gripping her arm, pulling her against him. Their lips crashed together, the kiss hard, hungry, a clash of fire and fury and all the words they had never spoken. For one breathless, stolen moment, the world vanished. No king, no court, no tribe. Only them. Then Cale tore himself away. His breath came fast, his chest rising and falling as though he had fought a battle. His hazel eyes burned with a mix of longing and regret. "I'm sorry," he said, voice raw. He released her and turned, striding into the shadows before she could stop him. Rain stood frozen, her chest still heaving, her lips tingling from the force of his kiss. Her fingers tightened around the dagger, its runes pulsing in time with her racing heart. For the first time in years, she felt breathless. The throne room blazed with light. Golden banners hung heavy from the high rafters, incense smoldered in braziers, and the polished marble floor gleamed like a mirror. Yet beneath the splendor, the air was sharp with unease. Rain walked its length in silence, her silver-blonde hair braided like a crown, her pale blue gown trailing behind her. Her steps did not falter, though every eye in the court burned upon her. She knew what awaited. Dorian sat upon the throne draped in crimson and gold, his golden hair gleaming in the sunlight, his blue eyes cold with pride. Beside him, Lyrissa stood resplendent in emerald silk, her painted lips curving into a smile sharp enough to cut. "Queen Rain," Dorian said, his voice carrying through the chamber, rich and practiced, every syllable weighted with vanity. "You are summoned here to answer for crimes against this crown. A queen who murders within her own chambers cannot sit beside me. You are stripped of your title." The words echoed like thunder. Murmurs rippled through the courtiers, some gasping, some smirking, others already shifting allegiance toward Lyrissa. Lyrissa's smile widened, her green eyes glittering with triumph. Dorian rose, his robes trailing behind him as he spread his hands like a priest before an altar. "I cannot have a murderer as my queen. You have shamed my reign, my image, my name. You will be taken to the dungeons to await judgment." He lifted his chin, basking in the theater of it. In his vanity, he believed himself untouchable, victorious. "Guards," he commanded, "seize her." Two armored men stepped forward, swords at their hips, eyes wary but obedient. They moved to flank her, one on each side. Rain bowed her head slightly, her expression serene. She allowed them to grip her arms, allowed them to turn her toward the heavy doors at the end of the hall. The courtiers whispered behind their hands. Lyrissa's laugh, soft and poisonous, carried across the marble. They reached the midpoint of the throne room. The incense smoke curled thick. The guards tightened their hold. Then, like the strike of a viper, she moved. Her hand slipped beneath her gown, fingers closing around the obsidian dagger bound to her thigh. In one swift, fluid motion, she drew it and dragged the blade across the throat of the guard on her right. A hot spray of blood arced across the marble. The second guard barely had time to shout before her hand slashed again, the dagger sinking deep into his neck. Both men collapsed at her feet, lifeblood pooling black upon the white stone. The court erupted into chaos, gasps, screams, silks rustling as nobles fled to the walls. Lyrissa clutched at Dorian's arm, her painted mouth parting in shock. Rain did not wait. She darted toward the far wall, pressing her hand against a panel of carved stone veined with ivy. With a faint groan, it shifted inward, revealing the narrow mouth of a secret passage. She slipped inside, the dagger still dripping in her hand, and the wall sealed shut behind her. In the dark corridor, her breath was steady, her heartbeat iron. She touched the dagger's runed hilt, its pulse thrumming like a second heart. The time had come. The forest had sent its signal. The court had shown its hand. the queen of the hollow crown, would not go quietly. The room was hidden beneath the palace, a chamber carved into stone, forgotten by most, remembered only by one. Rain had prepared it in secret, long before the crown had touched her brow. It was not a place of silk and perfume, but of steel and shadow. She moved through it with purpose. Shelves lined the walls, filled with vials and powders, blades and maps. She gathered what she needed: poisons distilled from nightshade and widow's root, salves for wounds, a pouch of herbs that could silence pain or amplify it. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, each item chosen with care. At the center of the room stood a mannequin draped in black leather, fitted, flexible, made for movement. She stripped away her gown, the pale blue silk pooling at her feet like a discarded lie, and dressed in the armor of her true self. The leather hugged her frame, whispering of war and wilderness. She braided her hair tighter, binding it close to her scalp, and sheathed the obsidian dagger at her hip. The blade pulsed faintly, its runes glowing with the rhythm of a heartbeat. When her fingers brushed the hilt, she swore she heard it whisper, not in words but in intent: blood, justice, queenship. She was no longer a queen of court. She was a queen of death, to those who polluted the kingdom with their vanity. Above in the palace corridors, Chaol searched. His boots struck stone as he moved through shadowed halls, his hazel eyes burning. He had seen the chaos in the throne room, the blood of the guards, the sealed passage. He knew where she had gone, though he could not follow. Every guard he passed muttered rumors of curses, of unnatural powers, but Chaol ignored them all. He was not afraid of what she was. He was only afraid of what they would try to do to her. Rain slipped through the palace's underbelly, emerging into the night beyond the walls. The forest loomed ahead, vast and ancient, its trees swaying like sentinels in the wind. The moon hung low, casting silver across the leaves. She walked alone, her steps silent, her breath steady. At the edge of the meeting place, a clearing where the trees bent inward, forming a natural cathedral, she paused. A black horse waited. Its coat shimmered like polished obsidian, its eyes dark and knowing. No reins, no saddle, only a woven band of vine and bone around its neck, the mark of her tribe. Rain approached, her hand brushing the creature's flank. It did not flinch. It bowed its head, as if recognizing her not as royalty, but as kin. She mounted in one fluid motion, the dagger at her side pulsing with quiet power. From the shadows of the forest, figures emerged one by one, cloaked in bark and hide, their bodies marked with paint and ash. Warriors of her tribe, silent and unyielding. Eyes gleaming like stars caught in darkness. They had been waiting, watching, guarding, and now they came to stand before her once more. The forest itself seemed to stir, branches bending, crows shifting in the treetops, as if the old gods bowed in acknowledgement. Rain lifted the dagger, its black edge drinking the moonlight. The runes glowed brighter, answering the gathered host. The forest had called her home. And this time, she would not return as a bride, or a pawn, or a queen in chains. She would return as judgment. The throne room glowed with excess. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, scattering light across polished marble and gilded columns. Music floated from a corner, strings and pipes weaving a tune meant for celebration. Goblets overflowed with wine, platters groaned with roasted meats and sugared fruits. Dorian sat high upon the throne, golden hair gleaming, smile wide, vanity fed with every toast raised in his honor. He leaned back, one jeweled hand stroking the armrest as if caressing his own reflection. Beside him, Lyrissa sparkled in emerald silk and jewels that draped her throat like chains of stars. She laughed easily, lips painted crimson, her hand resting on Dorian's arm as though she had already claimed the crown. "See how quickly the court forgets," Lyrissa purred, her voice meant for Dorian but loud enough to carry. "Already they cheer as though she never existed." Dorian's smile widened. Rain was always too small for this throne. She played at queen, but she never understood. A crown is not earned, it is displayed. And no one displays it better than I. Lyrissa tilted her head, green eyes flashing. "And I." "You," Dorian said, raising his goblet, "are the jewel that makes the crown worth wearing." The court laughed, shallow, eager, their voices echoing off high stone. Servants filled cups, minstrels played louder, and the celebration swelled. Chaol stood near the dais, unmoving, a silent sentinel in the chaos. His armor gleamed, but his hazel eyes burned with disgust. Each laugh grated against him, each toast to the new dawn soured in his gut. He could still feel the heat of rain breath at his ear, still hear her whisper, "If you take me, you would be my first." She was no ghost to him, no discarded queen. She was alive in every heartbeat he carried. The doors slammed open. A guard stumbled inside, panting, face pale beneath the torchlight. He fell to one knee before the throne, voice cracking with urgency. "Your Majesty, an army approaches the gates." The music faltered, goblets stilled, Dorian's smile flickered. "An army, whose banner?" The guard's eyes lifted, wide with terror. "They are led by the queen." The word struck the hall like a blade. Murmurs rose, sharp, frantic. Lyris's painted smile faltered, crimson lips parting in shock. Dorian's face twisted with disbelief. "Impossible. She's gone, she is." "Alive," the guard said, "and she is not alone." The court erupted. Nobles clutched pearls, whispered prayers, some already drifting toward the exits like rats from a sinking ship. Chaol's breath caught in his chest, a rush of fierce relief and awe breaking through his discipline. His heart pounded with certainty, with pride, with something dangerously close to joy. She lives. He held his place, expression hard, but inside the stir was uncontainable. He had not been wrong to believe in her strength. He had not been wrong to give her everything. The king and his jeweled queen might have thought the old queen dead. But Chaol knew the truth. Rain had returned, and she had brought judgment to their gates. The gates of the palace shuddered as though struck by thunder. A roar rose from beyond the walls, drums and horns, voices chanting in a language the court had long forgotten. The air trembled with it, carrying the promise of blood. Then the gates splintered. The tribe poured in like a shadow made flesh, warriors cloaked in bark and hide, their bodies streaked with ash and paint. They moved with the silence of wolves, obsidian blades flashing, war cries rising. Against them, the king's soldiers surged forward, armor clashing, steel ringing through the night. The courtyard became a storm of bodies and steel. Arrows hissed, spears struck, blood darkened the pale stone. Inside the great hall, Dorian's face drained of color. He stood frozen, golden hair catching the firelight, blue eyes wide with disbelief. How could she?" he whispered. "She was nothing, how could she be this?" Lyrissa clutched his arm, her painted lips trembling. "Do something, Dorian. Call the guard, call." "The guard is already dying," he snapped, voice cracking. "She was never supposed to," he stopped, as though admitting the truth would make it real, that he had never known his queen at all. Chaol moved through the chaos, sword drawn, gaze fixed on the courtyard where the tribe cut through soldiers with precision and fury. His chest pounded with a fierce, conflicting rhythm, pride at Sel's strength, dread for her safety, and the burning need to reach her. But as he stepped into the melee, a warrior lunged, ash-painted, eyes wild, blade swinging. Chaol parried the strike, voice sharp. "I am not your enemy." The warrior did not pause. To them he was steel and crest, a palace dog. Two more advanced, blades raised. Chaol's defense turned instinctive. He twisted, disarmed one, shoved another back, but not to kill. A soldier lunged from behind, blade aimed for the warrior's back. Chaol pivoted, catching the strike with his own sword, forcing the steel aside. The warrior froze, chest heaving, realization dawning. Chaol stood between him and death. For a moment, the painted tribesman stared. Then he gave a sharp nod and turned his blade on the soldiers instead. From the dais, Dorian's voice cracked through the chaos. "Chaol," his face twisted in rage, spit flying. "You dare stand with them, traitor." The word rang through the hall, echoed by frightened courtiers. "Traitor, traitor." Chaol stood tall, hazel eyes steady, jaw set. He did not answer the king. A new voice shattered the hall, cold, commanding, undeniable. "The only traitor here." The great doors of the throne room slammed wide. "Is you?" Rain stepped into the light, silver blonde hair braided tight, body clad in black leather, obsidian dagger gleaming at her hip. Her tribe spilled in behind her, chants echoing through the stone. Her blue eyes fixed on the throne, on the man who had once dismissed her as weak. Her voice cut the air like steel. "You, Dorian, vain king, false king. The crown you polish with your reflection is nothing. I am the queen of this realm, and tonight your reign ends." The clash of steel still rang through the halls, but the tide had turned. One by one, the king's soldiers fell beneath obsidian blades. The marble floors were slick with blood, banners torn, torches guttering in the drafts of battle. The palace that had once gleamed with vanity now echoed with death. Then came the sound of boots. Rain strode into the great hall, her leather armor whispering with each step, her braid bound close, her blue eyes hard as ice. She marched with the certainty of judgment made flesh, her dagger gleaming at her hip. Dorian stood frozen at the base of his throne, face pale, eyes wide, the golden crown upon his head suddenly a mockery of power. Rain lifted the obsidian blade and leveled it at him. He could not move. The runes glowed faintly, pinning him as surely as if chains bound his limbs. Two tribesmen surged forward, seizing him by the arms and forcing him to his knees. Rain turned then, her gaze falling on Lyrissa. The queen's painted lips trembled, her emerald silks clutched in her fists, her green eyes wide with horror. Rain's expression did not soften. She drew a small vial from her cloak, the liquid within black as night. "I have just the welcome gift for you," she said, her tone flat, merciless. Before Lyrissa could protest, Rain forced the vial against her lips, shoving the contents down her throat. The queen gagged, clawing at her neck, her crimson mouth frothing as the poison burned its way through her. Her body convulsed, eyes rolling back, black blood spilling from her lips before she collapsed lifeless at Rain's feet. Dorian broke, his voice cracked, desperate. "Rain, please, spare me. I can make this right. I will give you whatever you want." Rain's blue eyes fixed on him, cold and unfeeling. She drew the obsidian dagger and pressed it to his throat. He whimpered, trembling, his vanity stripped bare to nothing but fear. For a long, breathless moment, she stared at him, silent, impassive, her expression unreadable. Then, with a single precise motion, she dragged the blade across his neck. The cut was clean. Blood poured, staining the marble in a dark tide. Dorian fell forward, his crown tumbling from his head, clattering against the stone before it rolled into shadow. The hall fell silent. Cale dropped to his knees, his sword forgotten at his side. His chest heaved, his hazel eyes fixed on her in awe, in fear, in devotion all at once. He saw her not as the king had, not as the courtiers had, but as she truly was, a queen crowned not in gold, but in blood and inevitability. He bowed his head, torn between reverence and dread. For the first time, he did not know if his loyalty would save him or consume him. The throne room was silent, the air thick with the stench of blood. The courtiers who had not fled pressed themselves against the walls. Silks stained, jewels trembling at their throats. All eyes fixed on Rain, the queen who stood over the lifeless bodies of Dorian and Lyrissa. She raised the obsidian dagger, its runes still glowing faintly, and her voice rang clear across the hall. "The old crown is broken. If any here believe otherwise," she gestured to the corpses at her feet, "then join them." Not a voice rose in challenge. Heads bowed, knees bent, silence rippled through the court as one by one they lowered themselves before her. Terror, awe, recognition, it did not matter which drove them. The outcome was the same. Rain sheathed her dagger with deliberate calm. Her boots struck the marble as she crossed the hall. Cale still knelt where he had fallen, his sword at his side, his hazel eyes lifted to her. Awe and fear warred in his gaze, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. "My queen." Rain stopped before him. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then she knelt, lowering herself to his level, her blue eyes locked on his. She cupped his face in her hands, her fingers firm against his jaw. Without hesitation, she kissed him hard, fierce, claiming. The court gasped, the sound sharp against stone, but she did not waver. She broke the kiss only to breathe against his lips, her voice low and certain. "My king." Something in Cale broke. He rose, pulling her up with him, his hands gripping her as though he might never let go. He kissed her again, deeper this time, tears burning his eyes. His discipline, his restraint gone. All that remained was the man who had watched her rise and now saw her stand unmatched. Around them, the court bowed lower still, not daring to lift their eyes. In that moment, there was no king of vanity, no queen of jewels, only Rain and the man who had chosen her above all else. The kingdom shifted. Where once vanity had ruled from a gilded throne, now wisdom and steel held court. King Cale, steady and unyielding, brought order to the council, his voice measured, his hand firm. He listened where Dorian had postured, judged where Dorian had flaunted, and the people found in him a ruler they could trust. Yet it was not his crown alone that kept the kingdom upright. For beside him sat Rain. The courtiers never forgot the sight of her, dagger gleaming, eyes cold, blood on marble. They never forgot the queen who had torn down a throne of vanity and claimed it with silence and steel. She ruled with fairness, but also with memory. And all who looked upon her knew, if ever tested, if ever betrayed, she would remind them again who truly ruled. Together they rebuilt. The palace was no longer a hall of whispers and shallow praise, but a place where law was forged and upheld. The forest tribes walked its corridors as allies, their voices carrying equal weight. The old ways and the new stood side by side, bound by a queen who had survived both. Cale's hazel eyes never strayed far from her, even as he bore the weight of judgment and counsel. She was the shadow at his side, the pulse behind his words, the cold promise that balanced his calm. And so the kingdom learned peace, not soft, not fragile, but peace held sharp as a blade. For where Cale gave wisdom, Rain gave warning. And none doubted which was stronger.